What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? About a century ago, Langston Hughes published those words, beginning of his poem called Harlem. And I'm very lucky that when I was a wee lad, my parents were really into African American poetry. So it's a lot of Langston Hughes, a lot of Nikki Giovanni with ego tripping, great stuff like that. Now, it's been quite a few decades since I was a little kid and I first heard Harlem. Quite a few decades of me creating, professionally and otherwise. And I have a different perspective on what happens when a dream is deferred. It dies. See, every morning when I wake up, I see a graveyard. And in that graveyard are unfinished ideas, unfulfilled promises, things that I was so passionate about at that particular time that I swore were going to change the world, but I never released them out into the world. Now, you could be a math teacher, you could be a firefighter, you could be a garbage collector, it doesn't matter. Each and every one of us uses creativity on our path. So you probably can relate to what I'm talking about. And even though I've done a lot in my lifetime, there's still a lot of things I have not done, and I'm starting to realize why. I was waiting for these ideas to be perfect, and then and only then was I going to release them out into the world to change it. Emotional intelligence pioneer Brene Brown says that perfectionism is armor. It's different than an internal metric or standard that we have, as in I'll be better tomorrow than I am today. That's good, that's growth. That's the way it's supposed to be. No, when you get into a perfectionist mindset, it has nothing to do with internal, it's all external. And everything that you do goes down to the same basic question. But what will they think? Capital T in they. Perfectionism, Brene Brown says, is our way of hiding our true selves. The pastor, Richard Rohr, says that perfect is a mathematical idea, not a human one. I agree with both of them, because what makes me great and what makes you great and you great, what makes us creative are our flaws, our scars, our issues, our strange childhoods, whatever makes us us. That's what makes us perfectly imperfect. And we're at a period of time, we're always at a period of time when all our voices need to be heard, but we're also getting this pushback in ways that perhaps have never happened before, because we're always getting dual messages. Give it the old college try, and go big, or go home. Aim for the moon, and if you miss, you'll be among the stars. And second place is the first loser. Failure is the best teacher. Failure is not an option. Which one is it? Of course we feel like we need to be perfect. Of course we feel like we need to be great. Of course we feel like our creative ideas don't belong because we feel like we need to be perfect. So how do we get our ideas out there? How do we grab these diverse times and let ourselves be known? Because there's so many challenges. There's always so many challenges that we have where every voice needs to be heard. And there's one simple way to do this. You strive for good enough. Not to be the best, not to be excellent, not to be better than the other person. You strive for good enough. There's anecdotal studies, there's scientific studies, there's all these different things that are popping up now that are saying the best way to greatness, if not perfection, is to aim for good enough. There are three awesome things you get when you aim for good enough. The first thing is you get momentum. A few decades ago, there was a social scientist named Bluma Zeranig. She focused on how people interacted, particularly within the service industry. Her claim to fame was a study on waiters. There was a group of waiters who were having a rough time. They go over to the chef, for instance, and everything's laid out for the hungry customers except for the eggs and the toast. So now they have to placate the hungry customers and also make sure that the chef is on his or her game. Or they may go over to the hungry customers and they have no idea what they want. So now they have to spend 5 minutes calming down the chef because the chef doesn't want to be in the weeds, and they also have to come back and make sure that the customers are okay. This group, as you can imagine, felt less competent at their jobs the more of these unfinished tasks stacked up. They also felt less connected when they actually interacted with the people in the back or the people in the front. As a result of the first two, they actually were worse at their jobs because they were disconnected when they're actually doing their jobs. There was another group that had a different experience. They go in the back And for instance, everything's laid out ready for the hungry customers, good to go. They go to the hungry customers, they know exactly what they want. Cool. These folks that had completed tasks felt better at their jobs. And they also felt more connected, more present while they were doing their jobs, whether they were connecting with people in the back or the people in the front. Dr. Zernick discovered that those incomplete tasks, what scientists call open loops, because the circle isn't complete, these incomplete tasks, these open loops, took up more time, more attention, more space than these closed loops, the finished tasks. It's one of the reasons why we're less likely to celebrate a victory, closed loop, and more likely to harp on a defeat, open loop. Maybe that's why failure is the best teacher. This idea became known as the Zernick effect. Now, you experience this every single day. It's when you go through your email and you're able to reply to everyone and you close your laptop or you shut down your phone and you feel great. It's when you go and you declutter your desk or you organize the area of your home and you're ready to go ahead and tackle the next day. It's when you cross something off your to-do list and you feel energized, you get momentum to go forward. Now, both Brene Brown and her longtime colleague and friend, Elizabeth Gilbert, say that unused creativity is not benign. Unused creativity is not benign. This is how I interpret that. Those things that you have unfinished, unfulfilled, those things that you're working on in the back room, afraid to bring out into the public until they're perfect, those things are actually preventing you from doing great things today. Let me repeat that. Those things that you're waiting until the perfect moment to do tomorrow, that you keep on tinkering with until everything's perfect so that you cannot be criticized, those things are actually preventing you from doing great things at this moment. And what's the best way to close those loops? What's the best way to get started? What is the best way to make sure our diverse voices are heard? You strive for good enough. Because when you strive for good enough, the chances of you actually finishing something are near 100%. When you go for that perfect tomorrow, your odds are the exact opposite. So 1, when you strive for good enough, you're able to get momentum. 2, when you strive for good enough, you're able to get input. Now, I used to live in Silicon Valley, and as soon as you land at SFO Airport, before you even get to the city proper, you're going to hear 3 letters, MVP. There it means minimal viable product. There's a guy named Steve Blank who came up with this idea, a famous entrepreneur out there, as part of something called the Lean Startup Method. You create something for a community, something that you care about, something that they care about. You get it to them as soon as you know what they need. You make it not great, good enough. They get it, they gobble it up, they give you feedback, you iterate, you make it better, and then you do the same thing again until it's great, if not perfect. That's the Lean Startup cycle. That's MVP. Now, if you have a smartphone in your pocket, almost everything connected to it, from the apps that you love to the physical phone itself, the companies that created that use the Lean Startup or MVP model. One of the biggest ones is Google. They're now known as Alphabet, but for historical context, we'll call it Google. And back when Google started 2 decades ago, Sergey Brin and Larry Page were probably not thinking about the self-driving cars that dominate the headlines today. They probably were not thinking about you being able to control your home with your voice. They almost certainly were not thinking that 4 out of every 5 smartphones in the entire world will be using their system called Android. They were just 2 young grad students trying to get through Stanford with a simple dissertation, how to make a better search engine. It wasn't world domination, which is a simple search engine. That was good enough. It's good enough to have them graduate and good enough to start the little startup called Google. It wasn't until a year or 2 later that one of their first employees discovered what would be called AdWords. Let's say you own Joe's Plumbing. You pay Google X amount of dollars, and then when someone Googles or searches for plumbing, then your name will pop up at the top above all other search results. That basic idea became a $1 million idea, and then a $1 billion idea. It became so profitable for them that the self-driving cars and the voice-automated homes and the dominance of the Android system, it's hard to see that even happening because that research and development money came from this basic idea. But the key point, though, isn't the brilliance of the idea. It's that they didn't have that brilliant idea when they started. Imagine if they waited until they were perfect. We wouldn't be talking about them right now. They started with something that was good enough. And good enough often can be the bridge to greatness, or in this case, a $400 billion company. So 1, when you strive for good enough, you're able to get momentum. 2, when you strive for good enough, you're able to get input. And 3, my personal favorite, when you strive for good enough, you're able to collaborate, often with the very people that you're serving. Design historian Christopher Alexander talks about this extensively in his books, as do other design theorists. It comes to something called the desire path. You lean on the people that you're serving, and then they give you the best insight to serve them. Alexander and a few other folks talk about a legendary architect who was commissioned to design a university. He's like, great, I'll design the university, my firm will do it, except for one thing. We're just going to have grass, no pathways. Now, I've done grad school, I've been a professor. I'm trying to figure out what his pitch was to get a university to accept this. It must have been a heck of a pitch. But they went for it. And so they do the blueprints, they do the buildings, they lay out all the grass, and the freshmen are there, probably lost. They're figuring out their way, as are the faculty and the staff, and they figure out their way. So until a little bit of time passes where the architect says, okay, I'm coming back. And he comes back, and he's not looking at the beautiful green grass. He's looking for the muddy grass. He's looking for the disturbed grass. He's looking for the dead grass that's been trampled thousands of times by hundreds of feet. Because like ants marching, instinctively they've gone from building to building and found out the most effective, efficient, smartest ways to go from building to building, from path to path. And all the architect has to do is call them the cement trucks. Sometimes you have to let your idea out into the wild, and then it tells you how it can be perfect. So 1, when you strive for good enough, you're able to get momentum. 2, when you strive for good enough, you're able to get input. And finally, when you strive for good enough, you're able to collaborate, often with the very people that you serve. My favorite book is Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. It stars a guy named Santiago, a young man, and he's on what Joseph Campbell would call a hero's journey. He's been called and pulled towards this amazing physical treasure, but then the real treasure is the journey and the changes he'll go on during this journey. So it's towards the end of the fable, and Santiago's tired. He's been through all kinds of stuff emotionally, physically, mentally. He's exhausted. And he's talking to one of his mentors. And he says, listen, I'm not saying I'm going to quit. But if I did quit, what exactly would happen? And the mentor says, oh yeah, I've seen people quit. People quit all the time. 4 things will happen. Always 4 things. The first thing, you're going to feel great. You're going to feel awesome. The monkey will be off your back. The burden will be done. You won't be Sisyphus pushing the rock up the mountain. You can go back to your old life. You're good. You have nothing to worry about. You don't have to stretch anymore. But then one day, step 2, you're going to remember this journey. You're actually going to miss this journey. You're going to realize it wasn't as hard as you thought it was, and you're going to realize it stretched you in good ways. And you're going to say, if I fought for one more day, if I pushed a little bit harder, if I took one more step, could I have completed the journey? Could I have been a better person? Could I have gotten the treasure? And then it won't be a passing thought. It'll be a dominant thought. It'll be an obsessive thought. And it'll be this moment of saying, what exactly does it mean? Where exactly am I going? And my old life doesn't fit anymore. And of course it doesn't fit anymore, because it doesn't matter anymore, because you've seen too much, you've grown too much, you've done too much, you don't fit in your old life anymore. But then you didn't complete the journey. You're not done. You didn't get the treasure. You're not a new person. Your new life isn't earned yet. And then one day, it won't matter anymore. You'll forget about the journey, you'll forget about me, heck, you might even forget about the treasure. But there'll be a small space where you'll understand that something's missing, a vacancy that you feel in your life. You'll feel vaguely off and understand that there's something richer, something bigger that you should have done. And that vague vacancy will stay with you until your last days. So about a century ago, Langston Hughes asked, what happens to a dream deferred? Today, I ask, as you think of your unfulfilled ideas, incomplete promises, and things that you're waiting to do tomorrow, what dreams are you deferring today? Thank you.